January 13, 1980. A quiet Sunday afternoon at Chiricahua National Monument in southeastern Arizona, where towering rock formations rise from the desert floor like ancient cathedrals built by giants. Paul Braxton Fugate, a 41-year-old park ranger with years of experience navigating these sacred lands, was working in the visitor center when he made a simple decision that would transform him from protector of the wilderness into one of its greatest mysteries. At 2 p.m., he turned to a fellow employee and said, "If I'm not back by 4:30, lock up." Then he stepped out into the afternoon sun for what should have been a routine hike on familiar trails, wearing his official green and gray Park Service uniform with its distinctive arrowhead patch and gold ranger badge. Paul Fugate was never seen again. Despite extensive searches involving hundreds of volunteers, helicopters, bloodhounds, and some of the most experienced trackers in the Southwest, not a single trace of the missing ranger was ever found. No piece of clothing, no equipment, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was as if the ancient rock formations of Chiricahua had simply opened up and swallowed him whole, leaving behind one of the most baffling disappearances in National Park Service history. Tonight, we explore the case of Paul Fugate, the only park ranger who was lost and never found, and examine what happened during those final hours when an experienced outdoorsman walked into the wilderness and vanished forever. Chiricahua National Monument encompasses 12,000 acres of some of the most spectacular and treacherous terrain in the American Southwest. The park's defining features are its massive rock spires, balanced boulders, and narrow canyons that create a natural maze capable of confusing even experienced hikers. These geological formations, created by volcanic activity millions of years ago, rise as high as 400 feet and form countless hidden passages, caves, and vertical drops that could easily conceal evidence or claim lives. The Apache people considered this area sacred, calling it the land of standing up rocks, and their intimate knowledge of its dangers was born from centuries of survival in this unforgiving landscape. Paul Fugate was not a newcomer to this challenging environment. As a veteran park ranger, he had spent years patrolling these trails, conducting search and rescue operations, and guiding visitors through the monument's most dangerous areas. His experience in wilderness survival and his intimate knowledge of Chiricahua's geography made his disappearance all the more puzzling. Rangers at his level were trained to handle emergencies, navigate by landmarks, and survive in harsh conditions with minimal equipment. The idea that someone with his skills could simply become lost and perish without leaving any trace seemed almost impossible to colleagues who knew his capabilities. The monument's location in southeastern Arizona, near the Mexican border, added layers of complexity to the investigation. During the 1980s, this region was a corridor for drug trafficking and illegal immigration, activities that sometimes turned violent when different groups encountered each other in the remote desert. The possibility that Fugate had stumbled upon criminal activity or been mistaken for law enforcement by people engaged in illegal border crossings provided investigators with potential motives for foul play. The vast, sparsely populated landscape offered perfect concealment for criminal activities and disposal of evidence. Weather conditions on January 13, 1980, were mild by winter standards in southeastern Arizona, with clear skies and temperatures that posed no immediate threat to an experienced hiker. This eliminated the possibility that Fugate had been caught off guard by sudden weather changes, hypothermia, or other environmental factors that might explain a hiking accident. The timing of his departure, in broad daylight with several hours before sunset, suggested he was planning a routine patrol or recreational hike rather than an extended backcountry expedition that might have led him into unusually dangerous terrain. The initial response to Paul Fugate's disappearance was swift and comprehensive, reflecting both the National Park Service's commitment to its employees and the recognition that an experienced ranger vanishing without explanation was an extremely serious matter. When Fugate failed to return by his stated deadline of 4:30 p.m., park staff immediately began searching the most commonly used trails around the visitor center. By evening, when these initial efforts proved fruitless, a full-scale search and rescue operation was launched that would become one of the largest in the monument's history. The search effort mobilized resources from across the Southwest, including specialized teams from the Arizona Department of Public Safety, Border Patrol agents familiar with the terrain, and volunteer groups with extensive experience in desert rescue operations. Helicopters equipped with infrared sensors scoured the monument from above, while ground teams with bloodhounds attempted to pick up Fugate's scent trail from the visitor center. The search expanded to cover not just the official trail system, but the vast backcountry areas where an experienced hiker might venture off established paths. What made the search particularly challenging was Chiricahua's unique geology. The massive rock formations created countless hiding places where a person could fall and become trapped, while the maze-like canyon systems offered thousands of potential routes that would need to be individually explored. Vertical rock faces and unstable boulder fields presented danger to searchers themselves, limiting how thoroughly some areas could be examined. The possibility that Fugate had suffered a climbing accident and fallen into one of the monument's many crevices or caves meant that his remains could be concealed just feet from major trails. As days turned into weeks, the search methodology evolved to include specialized techniques for the challenging terrain. Rock climbing teams rappelled into deep fissures and explored cave systems, while ground-penetrating radar was used in areas where a body might be buried under rockfall. The investigation expanded beyond the monument's boundaries to include surrounding private lands, Forest Service property, and even areas across the Mexican border where someone might have wandered if they became disoriented. Despite these extensive efforts, not a single piece of physical evidence connected to Fugate was ever discovered. The investigation took a significant turn when authorities began treating the case as a possible homicide rather than a missing person incident. This shift reflected the growing conviction that an experienced ranger familiar with the terrain would not simply disappear due to accident or misadventure. FBI agents joined the investigation, interviewing park staff, analyzing Fugate's personal life for potential threats, and exploring whether his disappearance might be connected to criminal activity in the border region. The lack of any obvious motive or suspects made this aspect of the investigation particularly challenging. Over the following years, various leads and potential sightings emerged, but none provided the breakthrough investigators hoped for. Rumors circulated about Fugate being seen in Mexico, having suffered amnesia, or starting a new life under different circumstances. Psychics and dowsers offered their services, claiming they could locate his remains through supernatural means. Anonymous tips came in sporadically, some suggesting specific locations where his body might be found, others proposing elaborate theories about his disappearance. Each lead was investigated thoroughly, but none yielded credible evidence or brought the case closer to resolution. The prevailing theory among investigators is that Paul Fugate encountered foul play during his January 13th hike, possibly stumbling upon criminal activity in the remote areas near the Mexican border. The monument's proximity to drug trafficking routes and its use as a corridor for illegal border crossings created numerous opportunities for violent encounters between law enforcement personnel and criminals who might view a uniformed ranger as a threat. This theory explains both the complete absence of physical evidence and the failure of extensive search efforts to locate any trace of Fugate, suggesting his remains were deliberately concealed or removed from the area entirely. Another compelling theory focuses on the possibility of a hiking accident in Chiricahua's treacherous terrain, specifically a fall into one of the monument's many unmapped caves or fissures. The park's volcanic geology created countless hidden spaces beneath the surface, some extending deep underground and accessible only through narrow openings that might be concealed by vegetation or loose rock. An experienced hiker who suffered an injury preventing him from calling for help could have died in such a location, with his remains protected from both weather and discovery by search teams. This theory is supported by the fact that even today, new cave systems are occasionally discovered in similar geological formations. Some investigators have considered the possibility that Fugate chose to disappear voluntarily, perhaps to escape unknown personal problems or start a new life elsewhere. This theory suggests he might have used his knowledge of the terrain to stage his own disappearance, possibly with advanced planning that included establishing a new identity, or arranging transportation from a prearranged location. However, this explanation is considered unlikely by those who knew Fugate personally, as he showed no signs of emotional distress or personal problems that might motivate such drastic action. His financial affairs were in order, and he maintained close relationships with family and colleagues that would have been difficult to abandon. The most disturbing theory is that Fugate's disappearance was the result of a planned attack by someone who knew his routines and took advantage of his predictable patrol patterns. This could have involved someone familiar with the monument's operations, perhaps a former employee or frequent visitor who understood when and where rangers conducted their activities. The complete absence of evidence suggests a level of planning and knowledge that goes beyond opportunistic crime, implying that Fugate may have been specifically targeted rather than becoming a random victim of circumstances beyond his control. Nearly 45 years have passed since Paul Fugate walked out of the Chiricahua Visitor Center and into one of the Southwest's most enduring mysteries. The $60,000 reward offered by the National Park Service remains unclaimed, and the case continues to haunt both investigators and the community of people who knew and respected him. In an age of GPS tracking, cell phone communication, and advanced search techniques, it seems almost impossible that a person could simply vanish so completely. Yet Paul Fugate's disappearance stands as a reminder that vast areas of our wilderness remain capable of keeping their secrets. The impact of Fugate's disappearance extended far beyond the immediate investigation, influencing National Park Service policies regarding ranger safety and communication protocols. His case became a touchstone for discussions about the risks faced by law enforcement personnel working in remote areas and the limitations of search and rescue operations in challenging terrain. For the ranger community, Paul Fugate represents both the dedication required to protect our national treasures and the ultimate sacrifice that commitment can demand. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Paul Fugate's story is how it demonstrates the thin line between protection and vulnerability that defines the relationship between park rangers and the wilderness they serve. These men and women dedicate their careers to preserving and interpreting some of America's most spectacular and dangerous landscapes, often working alone in areas where help might be hours or days away. Paul Fugate's disappearance serves as a sobering reminder that the wilderness doesn't distinguish between those who come to exploit it and those who come to protect it. As visitors continue to explore Chiricahua National Monument, walking the same trails Paul Fugate once patrolled, many pause to consider what might have happened to the ranger who vanished among the standing rocks. His story has become part of the monument's oral history, passed down by guides and park staff who ensure that his memory lives on even though his fate remains unknown. Until someone comes forward with information that can finally solve this decades-old mystery, Paul Fugate will remain what he never intended to become, not just a protector of the wilderness, but one of its most enduring and tragic mysteries.